I am Rick Stanford, 70 years old, and somehow still processing the betrayal my own flesh and blood inflicted on me. As a self-made industrial refrigeration tycoon in Dallas, Texas, I thought I had built a legacy that would protect my family. But last Christmas, I learned the hard way that money without discipline only breeds toxic entitlement. My son sent me a text telling me to celebrate the holidays alone because they needed space. Then his wife accidentally messaged the family group chat, bragging about finally kicking the old fossil out, saying maybe someday I would earn the right to sit with them. I simply read the message, put down the vintage train set I was buying for my grandson, and replied, "Thanks for letting me know. I will cancel all payments today." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to protect your own peace. It was exactly 3:00 in the afternoon on December 23rd when the illusion of my perfect family shattered completely. I was standing in a high-end vintage toy boutique in Highland Park Village, surrounded by the smell of expensive pine candles and polished wood. The store was bustling with wealthy grandparents buying last-minute gifts, their faces glowing with holiday cheer. I was holding a handcrafted brass locomotive. It was heavy solid, the kind of toy that lasts for generations. I was planning to give it to my grandson. Since my beautiful wife Beverly passed away 3 years ago from a sudden illness, my son Bradley and his family were all I had left in this world. Or so I foolishly believed. I had willingly moved out of our massive family estate and into a modest, quiet apartment downtown, simply because Bradley and his wife Tiffany said they needed a proper home to raise their child. I gave them everything, hoping to buy the closeness and warmth that Beverly used to bring to our lives. I was standing there at the cash register, smiling at the clerk as she began to wrap the brass train in festive red paper when my phone vibrated in my heavy winter coat. I pulled it out, expecting a message about what time I should come over for our traditional Christmas Eve dinner. Instead, the text was from Bradley. I adjusted my glasses and stared at the glowing screen. The words were short, cold, and entirely unexpected. "Dad, celebrate Christmas on your own this year. We need space as a family." I stopped breathing for a moment. The ambient noise of the toy store seemed to fade away into a dull ringing in my ears. Celebrate Christmas on my own. I was a 70-year-old widower. This was the holiday season. We had spent every single Christmas together since Bradley was born 35 years ago. I reread the text, trying to find some hidden context, some reasonable explanation. Maybe someone was sick. Maybe Tiffany was overwhelmed. I was ready to offer an excuse for him, ready to be the understanding father who absorbs the blow to keep the peace. I typed out a message asking if everything was all right, but before my thumb could hit the send button, my phone vibrated a second time. It was another message, this time from Tiffany. But as my eyes scanned the text, my blood turned to absolute ice. It was painfully obvious she had meant to send this to a private chat with her high society friends. But in her haste, she had dropped it right into our shared family group message. Finally kicked the old fossil out. The message read, "God, I could not endure another holiday listening to his boring manufacturing stories. Maybe someday he will earn the right to sit with us, but for now, the mansion is ours." I stood completely frozen. The clerk behind the counter asked me if I would be paying with cash or card, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. I looked down at the words glowing on my phone screen. Kicked the old fossil out. Earn the right to sit with us. A profound, suffocating silence washed over my mind quickly, followed by a blinding flash of clarity. Earn the right. The phrase echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of my skull until it morphed into a cold, hard rage. I did not build a 40-year empire from a single rusty toolbox, to be spoken to like a stray dog begging for scraps. I looked at the brass train being wrapped on the counter. Then I thought about the house they were currently sitting in. The sprawling 6-bedroom Highland Park mansion with the heated infinity pool and the imported Italian marble floors. The old fossil had paid $2.2 million in pure cash for that house. I thought about the exclusive country club membership they bragged about on social media, funded entirely by the trust account I set up. I thought about Tiffany and her endless parade of designer bags, luxury spa days, and lavish brunches. I thought about the American Express Platinum card in her wallet, a card tied directly to my personal bank account, which I quietly paid off to the tune of $10,000 every single month, just so she could play the role of a wealthy socialite. They were living a millionaire lifestyle entirely subsidized by the sweat grease and sleepless nights of the old fossil they despised so much. Beverly had warned me. In her final months, my brilliant, perceptive wife had held my hand and told me that cushioning Bradley from every fall would only turn him into a weak, entitled man. She warned me that Tiffany was consumed by a hunger for status that no amount of money could ever satisfy. I had ignored her warnings out of blind paternal love, but reading those text messages in the middle of a crowded toy store, the blindfold was ripped away permanently. There was no sadness left in me. There was no urge to call them and demand an explanation. There was no desire to scream or cry or beg for a seat at the table I had literally purchased. When you survive 4 decades in the cutthroat industrial business world, you learn that anger is a useless emotion. Action is the only thing that matters. I looked up at the clerk who was staring at me with polite concern. "I am terribly sorry," I said, my voice steady and surprisingly calm. "I will not be needing the train today after all. Please cancel the transaction." I walked out of the boutique and stepped into the crisp, biting Texas winter air. I stood on the sidewalk watching the luxury cars roll by, feeling a strange sense of liberation wash over me. The heavy burden of trying to buy my family's affection had just been lifted from my shoulders. I unlocked my phone, opened the family group chat, and typed my response. I did not use capital letters. I did not use exclamation points. I kept it as clinical and precise as a corporate termination notice. "Thanks for letting me know. I will cancel all payments today. Merry Christmas." I hit send. Then, without missing a beat, I opened my banking application. With a calmness that almost frightened me, I navigated to the credit card management portal. I selected the secondary American Express Platinum card assigned to Tiffany. With one tap, I froze the account. I moved to the autopay section of my checking account. I found the recurring monthly transfers for the Highland Park Mansion property taxes, the premium homeowner's insurance, and the luxury landscaping service. Cancel. 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 I slid my phone back into my coat pocket, buttoned it up against the wind, and began to walk back to my car. The war had silently begun, and if my son and his wife thought I was just a clueless old man waiting to be pushed aside, they were about to receive the most brutal education of their lives. The drive from Highland Park Village to my apartment took exactly 23 minutes. For the entire ride, my hands gripped the leather steering wheel with a steady, quiet resolve. I drove past the sprawling estates wrapped in elaborate Christmas lights, past the perfectly manicured lawns and towering oak trees. It was the exact neighborhood I had moved my son into. The neighborhood where I had spent a small fortune to secure a beautiful future for a family that clearly no longer wanted me. I pulled into the cold underground parking garage of my modest downtown apartment building. When Beverly passed away, the silence in our massive family home had become far too heavy for me to bear alone. I had given it to Bradley and Tiffany, thinking a young family would breathe vibrant life back into those walls. I had taken a simple 2-bedroom unit for myself, believing I was doing the noble fatherly thing. Walking into my quiet apartment now, the harsh reality of that decision finally hit me. I had sacrificed my twilight years to build them a kingdom, and they had locked me out of the castle. I took off my heavy winter coat, draped it over the back of a chair, and walked straight to my desk. I did not bother turning on the overhead lights. The cool glow of the afternoon sun filtering through the blinds was enough. I sat down in my leather office chair, the exact same chair I had sat in when negotiating million-dollar industrial refrigeration contracts. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my secure banking application. My heart rate was perfectly normal. There was no hesitation whatsoever. First, I navigated to the credit card portal. The American Express Platinum account stared back at me. I clicked on the Authorized Users tab. Tiffany Stanford. Her name sat there attached to a card that had accumulated over $9,000 in charges this month alone. Designer shoes, organic groceries, high-end spa treatments, and thousands of dollars at a luxury boutique hotel just last weekend. I tapped the screen. A prompt asked if I was absolutely sure I wanted to freeze this card. I tapped yes. The card was instantly dead. Next, I moved to the Automated Payments tab. Every single month, thousands of dollars flowed out of my account to cover the running costs of the Highland Park mansion. They called it their house, but my name was still entirely on the deed. I scrolled down to the property tax escrow payment. It was a massive monthly drain that allowed them to live completely debt-free. I hit cancel. Then came the premium homeowner's insurance policy. Cancel. I found the monthly retainer for the luxury landscaping service, the people who kept Tiffany's exotic rose bushes perfectly trimmed, and the expansive lawn looking like a professional golf course. Cancel. Finally, I found the pool maintenance and the expensive smart home security subscription. Cancel. Cancel. In less than 3 minutes, I had completely dismantled the massive financial scaffolding that held up their highly artificial lives. I closed the banking application, set the phone face down on the polished wood of my desk, and exhaled deeply. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt an incredible, overwhelming sense of absolute clarity. For 3 long years, I had been an open vault bleeding cash to sustain the illusion of their success. I had convinced myself that this was simply what a good, supportive father did. But a good father does not fund his own disrespect. A good father does not pay to be treated like a disposable nuisance. I stood up, walked into my small kitchen, and went through the familiar comforting motions of making a cup of black coffee. I measured the grounds carefully, poured the hot water, and listened to the slow drip of the machine. The silence in my apartment was no longer lonely. It felt profoundly peaceful. It felt like territory I had finally reclaimed. I took my warm mug, walked back into the living room, and sat down heavily in my armchair. I looked at the grandfather clock ticking quietly in the corner. I knew exactly how Tiffany shopped on the day before Christmas Eve. She would be out right now running through high-end department stores, picking out last-minute luxury items to impress her shallow socialite friends. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The bitter, rich taste grounded me. I watched my phone resting on the glass coffee table. Exactly 55 minutes after I had frozen the accounts, the screen lit up brilliantly. It was a call from Tiffany. I did not reach for it. I simply watched it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it rang again. Then came a frantic text message. Then another desperate call. Then a call from Bradley. Then 3 more texts in rapid succession. I sat there in the fading afternoon light, sipping my coffee as my phone vibrated furiously against the wood. 55 missed calls in the span of 15 minutes. The digital panic was entirely palpable. I could almost picture the exact moment the cashier handed the heavy metal card back to Tiffany, with an apologetic smile telling her the transaction had been declined. I could vividly imagine her embarrassed laugh, the frantic searching through her designer purse for another card that she simply did not have. On the 56th try, I finally reached out and picked up the phone. I pressed the green button and raised the device to my ear. I did not say hello. I just listened to the chaos. Dad. What is going on? Bradley's voice blasted through the tiny speaker. He was practically shouting. The background noise was unmistakable. He was in a crowded, high-end retail environment. I could hear the faint sound of classical Christmas music and the polite, hushed murmurs of wealthy shoppers. Tiffany's card just declined at Neiman Marcus, in front of half the country club board. Her card declined. Dad, it says the account is frozen. Did you forget to pay the bill? Call the bank right now and fix this. She is literally crying in the dressing room. I took another slow sip of my coffee, savoring the absolute desperation in my son's voice. He was not worried about my health. He did not ask if I had made it home safely. His only concern was the sudden interruption of his free money and the public humiliation of his materialistic wife. "Dad, are you there?" Bradley demanded, his tone shifting from panic to entitled righteous anger. "Tell me you are fixing this right now. We have $5,000 worth of gifts sitting at the register. The manager is looking at us like we are criminals. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" I let the silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment. I wanted him to hear the absolute quiet on my end of the line. When I finally spoke, my voice was low and steady. "I am perfectly aware of how embarrassing it is." I hung up. The war had silently begun. The rest of the evening passed in absolute silence. I sat in my worn leather armchair and watched the city lights flicker outside my window. I slept peacefully for the first time in years. The morning of December 24th arrived with a sharp chill. I brewed my black coffee and waited patiently. I knew my son intimately. I knew he would never accept a financial defeat over a brief phone call. He needed to deploy his charm and his practiced vulnerability in person. It was his signature move whenever he needed my deep pockets to fix the damage he caused. At exactly 9 o'clock, a frantic knocking echoed through the quiet hallway. I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter and walked deliberately to the front door. When I pulled it open, Bradley was standing on the welcome mat. He looked completely disheveled, a stark contrast to his usual polished appearance. His hair was uncombed, his shoulders were slumped forward, and he had dark circles under his eyes. It was a masterful performance of a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Dad," he exhaled, his voice trembling with manufactured relief. "Thank God you are home. Can I come in?" I stepped aside slowly, allowing him to enter my living space. He walked in, rubbing his face with his hands, playing the part of the exhausted, misunderstood victim flawlessly. I closed the door and turned to face him, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "Dad, I am so incredibly sorry about yesterday." He began pacing the short length of my living room. That text message, the one Tiffany sent by mistake, it was completely taken out of context. It was a terrible, stupid error in judgment. Taken out of context, I asked calmly, folding my arms across my chest. "Please enlighten me. How exactly does one take the phrase 'finally kicked the old fossil' out of context?" He flinched visibly at my directness, but quickly recovered his footing. "You have to understand, Dad, Tiffany is not well right now. She has been dealing with severe depression and crippling anxiety over the past few months. She is barely holding her life together. The pressure of the holidays is making everything exponentially worse for her mental state. She did not mean you were a fossil. She was just venting to her private therapy group about feeling completely overwhelmed by family obligations. She is terribly fragile, Dad. She desperately needs a quiet, stress-free Christmas with just the three of us to protect her sanity. That is why I sent that message about needing space. We simply did not want to burden you with her emotional breakdown." I listened to his words, marveling at the sheer audacity of the lie. Tiffany's so-called fragility had never once stopped her from hosting lavish cocktail parties or taking expensive weekend trips to luxury resorts in Aspen. Her anxiety seemed to miraculously disappear whenever she was swiping my credit card at designer boutiques. But I nodded slowly, deliberately, allowing him to weave his intricate web of deceit. "I see," I said softly, lowering my voice to mimic a concerned father. I had absolutely no idea she was struggling profoundly behind closed doors. Bradley sighed heavily, clearly mistaking my strategic silence for emotional submission. "It has been a living nightmare, Dad." And then when her card declined yesterday afternoon, she had a complete panic attack right there in the middle of the store. She was humiliated in front of her friends. Which brings me to the real reason why I am here this morning. He stopped pacing the floor and looked directly at me with wide, pleading eyes. "Dad, I need a massive favor from you. I know you are deeply angry and you have every right to be upset with us, but I need you to unfreeze the bank accounts just for today. Our holiday caterer is threatening to walk away." "Caterer," I repeated, letting a trace of genuine confusion filter into my voice. "For a quiet, stress-free Christmas dinner with just the three of you." "Yes," Bradley answered quickly, not missing a single beat in his fabricated narrative. "It is a highly specialized private chef service. Tiffany has severe dietary restrictions because of her anxiety medication, and this specific chef prepares custom organic meals tailored to her needs. But they are demanding a final payment of $15,000 this morning, or they will cancel the entire holiday menu. We have absolutely nothing in the house to eat. If this falls through, Tiffany will completely break down. I am begging you, Dad. I just need $15,000 to save our family Christmas. $15,000 for a private chef to cook a modest dinner for 3 people. The sheer mathematical absurdity of the request hung heavily in the dead air between us. In my 40 years of navigating corporate negotiations, I had seen powerful men lie directly to my face for millions of dollars, but rarely had I witnessed a lie executed with such careless, insulting transparency. I walked past my son, moving toward the large bay window that overlooked the busy downtown street below my apartment. I needed a moment to control the intense mixture of grief and disgust churning violently in my chest. I peered through the cold glass, looking down at the street parking reserved exclusively for guests of my building. Sitting directly below my window, gleaming under the pale winter sun, was a brand-new slate-gray Porsche Panamera. I stared intently at the vehicle. I took in the aggressive curves of the bodywork, the custom matte black rims, and the undeniable aura of extreme flashy wealth. Bradley was a mid-level project manager at a medium-sized, completely unremarkable tech firm. His annual salary was respectable for his age, but it was fundamentally not enough to finance a luxury sports car that cost well over $150,000. He could not afford that car. Not with the massive mortgage on the Highland Park estate which I was paying, and certainly not with Tiffany's insatiable spending habits which I was subsidizing. My gut twisted into a tight, incredibly painful knot. The math of his life was completely broken. The $15,000 dinner, the brand-new Porsche Panamera, the constant need for me to cover their baseline living expenses. It all pointed to a singular reality. Bradley was bleeding cash from somewhere else entirely, or he was hiding a massive financial disaster of epic proportions. The text message had been the spark, but looking down at that German sports car, I realized I was standing on top of a massive powder keg. I turned away from the cold window and looked back at my son, who was still standing in the center of my living room, waiting for his $15,000 lifeline. I knew right then that confronting him with logic would only make him defensive and angry. I needed him to believe he had won. I needed him to drop his guard so I could find out exactly how deep this dark rabbit hole truly went. I looked at my son's desperate, pleading eyes. $15,000. I let the number bounce around in my mind, weighing the sheer absurdity of the request against the reality of the situation. A $15,000 bill for a quiet family evening was not a catering invoice. It was a blatant, insulting lie. Combine that with the brand-new Porsche sitting in the parking lot downstairs, and my gut was screaming that something was fundamentally and terribly wrong. He simply did not possess the financial resources to command that kind of lifestyle without my direct assistance. Confronting him right now, however, would be a monumental tactical error. If I pushed him into a corner, he would simply raise his defenses, fabricate another complex layer of lies, and retreat into the shadows where I could not track him. I needed him to believe he had won a victory. I needed him to drop his guard completely so I could find out exactly how deep this dark rabbit hole truly went. I kept my face perfectly soft. I let my shoulders droop just a fraction of an inch, practicing the exact posture of a lonely father who was terrified of losing his only son. I forced my breathing to slow down, mimicking the rhythm of a man burdened by immense regret. The silence stretched heavily between us as I stared at him. "Bradley," I said, allowing my voice to waver perfectly. "I am so incredibly sorry. I let my temper get the absolute best of me yesterday. When I read that message from Tiffany, my heart just broke. I felt so discarded, so useless to the two of you. I acted rashly because I was deeply hurt, and I should never have let my personal emotions jeopardize her fragile mental health or your private holiday dinner." I watched as the tension visibly drained from Bradley's shoulders. The performance was working flawlessly. He stepped forward, reaching out to squeeze my arm, playing the role of the forgiving, magnanimous son to absolute perfection. "I understand, Dad," he said softly, his voice dripping with rehearsed empathy. "We know you were deeply hurt. Tiffany feels absolutely terrible about the whole situation. Her anxiety is just tearing her apart from the inside. We just want to move past this unfortunate misunderstanding and have a peaceful Christmas. But I really need to pay this private caterer within the next hour, or they are going to pull our entire customized menu. We have absolutely no groceries in the house, Dad. Please, I just need to fix this." I nodded slowly, keeping my eyes cast downward in a show of total submission. "Let me see what I can do to help," I murmured. I walked slowly to my heavy oak desk, ensuring my steps looked slightly unsteady. I opened the bottom right drawer and retrieved a small leather card holder. Inside was a secondary corporate credit card. It was a specialized account I rarely used, completely separate from my main banking profile. It had a strict credit limit of $25,000. But more importantly, it was intimately tied to my primary corporate security system. It was not a lifeline. It was a tracking beacon. I pulled the silver card from the leather sleeve and turned back to my son. "Here," I said, holding the card out to him with a gentle, reassuring smile. "This is a secure backup account. It has enough available balance to cover the caterer and any other small emergencies you might run into today. Go take care of your wife. Save your Christmas dinner. We can talk about everything else calmly after the holidays are over." Bradley took the card, his fingers practically snatching the plastic from my hand. He looked down at the silver reflection, and for a fleeting fraction of a second, a smug, victorious smirk flashed across his face. He had won. He had successfully manipulated the clueless old fossil into opening the vault once again. He was completely unaware that he had just swallowed a hook covered in poison. "Thank you, Dad," he said, slipping the card carefully into his designer jacket pocket. "You have no idea how much this means to us. You really saved the day. I will call you tomorrow to wish you a Merry Christmas. I have to run and pay this vendor before they cancel our contract." He turned on his heel and walked briskly out of my apartment, his pace hurried and eager. He did not ask how I was spending the holiday. He did not offer to stay for a cup of coffee. He simply took the money and abandoned the old fossil exactly as he had planned to do all along. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, the metallic sound of the latch echoing loudly in the quiet hallway. I stood perfectly still in the center of my living room, listening to his rapid footsteps fade down the corridor. I listened intently until I heard the faint chime of the elevator arriving and the mechanical hum of the doors closing behind him. The moment I was absolutely certain I was alone, the sad, stooped posture of the guilty father vanished. I straightened my spine. I rolled my shoulders back, feeling the familiar sharp clarity of absolute focus wash over my body. The emotional father who had coddled his son for 3 decades died right there on the living room rug. The man standing in the apartment now was Richard Stanford, the ruthless, calculating chief executive officer. My blood ran cold with total efficiency. I walked back to my desk and picked up my phone. I no longer saw Bradley as a son who had lost his way. I saw him as a hostile corporate entity attempting a takeover of my personal life and my assets. They wanted to play games with my money. They wanted to treat me like a bank that could be swindled with a few fake tears and a hollow apology. But they had profoundly underestimated the sheer strategic capability of the man who had funded their existence. Bradley had chosen the wrong target. I opened my laptop and woke the screen. I needed data. I needed hard, undeniable facts. I had to uncover the exact mechanics of this massive deception. The $15,000 dinner was a smokescreen. The new luxury sports car was a massive red flag. I sat down in my leather office chair, my fingers resting lightly over the keyboard. I stared at the monitor, my mind already formulating a precise, multi-tiered plan of attack. Every single lie they had recklessly and meticulously crafted to keep me completely docile and compliant was about to be systematically deconstructed by the very person they thought they had defeated. They had absolutely no idea what kind of storm they had just invited into their seemingly perfect, entirely artificial lives. The time for emotional reactions was over. The time for surgical, devastating investigation had arrived. I took a deep, steadying breath, preparing myself to rip apart the beautiful illusion of my family and expose the reality hiding underneath. The bait had been fully swallowed, and now the hunt was on. I walked straight to my kitchen counter where my phone was still resting. The screen was dark now, a quiet void after the storm of 55 missed calls. I picked it up and dialed a number I had hoped I would never have to call under these circumstances. Mitchell Harper had been my corporate attorney and personal confidant for over 20 years. He was a brilliant, meticulous man who had helped me navigate the complex legal waters of my industrial refrigeration empire. When he answered on the third ring, his voice was crisp and professional, entirely unaware of the domestic earthquake that had just occurred. "Mitchell, I need you to initiate a comprehensive forensic audit immediately," I said, skipping pleasantries completely. "I want you to pull every single document, deed, and financial record tied to the Highland Park property. I want a complete background check on all current liabilities, liens, and tax assessments attached to that house. Leave absolutely nothing to chance. I want the results on my desk by tomorrow afternoon." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Rick, are you all right?" Mitchell asked, his tone shifting into immediate concern. "You sound incredibly tense. Did something happen with the estate?" I took a deep breath, staring at the polished granite of my kitchen island. "Bradley and Tiffany have decided that I am no longer a required part of this family," I explained, keeping my voice devoid of any emotional tremor. "They officially disinvited me from Christmas. But my son just stood in my living room and fed me a desperate, fabricated story about needing $15,000 to save a modest family dinner because of a sudden emergency. He drove here in a brand new Porsche that he absolutely cannot afford on his salary. The math does not align, Mitchell. Something is deeply wrong, and I need to know exactly what kind of financial exposure I am dealing with before I make my next move." "I understand completely," Mitchell replied, his voice shifting into absolute tactical mode. "I will pull the title and the current mortgage profile right now. If they have attempted anything reckless with the equity or the property taxes, I will find it. I will put my best associate on this immediately." "Thank you, Mitchell. I will await your call," I said, and ended the connection. I placed the phone down and walked slowly back to my desk. The physical evidence of my son's deception was out there, buried in bank statements and legal documents, but I needed a more immediate confirmation. I needed to see exactly what was happening at that house right this very second. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my tablet. When I purchased the Highland Park mansion for them 3 years ago, Tiffany had insisted on installing a state-of-the-art, comprehensive smart home security system. She claimed she needed it to feel safe in such a massive, sprawling estate. I had paid the exorbitant installation fee and covered the premium monthly subscription without a second thought. But Bradley and Tiffany, in their arrogant carelessness, had forgotten one incredibly crucial detail. Because I was the one paying the invoices, the entire security network from the perimeter cameras to the smart locks was registered under my primary corporate email address. I possessed the master administrative access. I powered on the device and opened the security application. My pulse quickened slightly as the screen loaded. The application prompted me for my master password. I typed it in smoothly, hit enter, and waited for the encrypted connection to establish itself. A grid of high-definition video feeds suddenly populated the screen, displaying real-time footage of my $2.2 million property. What I saw on that glowing screen completely shattered the pathetic fabricated lie my son had just spun in my living room. The $15,000 was not for a quiet, stress-free family dinner to accommodate Tiffany's fictional anxiety. The expansive circular driveway of the Highland Park mansion was absolute chaos. 3 massive commercial box trucks were parked on the imported cobblestone, their rear doors wide open. A small army of workers in matching black uniforms was moving rapidly back and forth, unloading heavy equipment. I tapped the screen to expand the front gate camera view. 2 men were carefully maneuvering a pair of enormous 6-foot-tall ice sculptures down the ramp of a refrigerated truck. The sculptures were intricately carved into the shapes of soaring eagles gleaming under the bright winter sun. Another crew was rapidly rolling out a plush, luxurious red carpet, stretching it from the wrought iron front gates all the way up to the grand mahogany double doors. This was not a modest gathering for 3 people. This was a massive, highly coordinated, elite social event. I switched the video feed to the sprawling backyard and the heated infinity pool area. The sheer scale of the operation taking place on my property was staggering. Massive white event tents had been erected across the perfectly manicured lawn. Elaborate crystal chandeliers were being hung from the tent ceilings, and dozens of round banquet tables were being draped in expensive silk linens. I watched as a team of caterers unloaded wooden crates, stacked high with vintage champagne and premium liquor. And right in the center of the manicured garden, directing the chaos like an enraged general, was my daughter-in-law. I zoomed the camera in on Tiffany. She was wearing a thick designer fur coat, holding a clipboard in one hand and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. Her face was contorted in absolute fury. She was screaming aggressively, pointing her finger at a group of 12 musicians who were desperately trying to set up a massive stage area for a live band. I could not hear the audio, but her body language was unmistakable. She was berating them, demanding perfection, acting like a wealthy aristocrat commanding her lowly servants. There was no trace of the fragile, anxious woman Bradley had described to me just an hour ago. There was no crippling depression preventing her from functioning. There was only a ruthless, entitled woman orchestrating a lavish gala funded entirely by my stolen money. I sat back in my leather chair, the glow of the tablet reflecting in my eyes. The sheer audacity of their deception was breathtaking. They had banned me from the house, told me to celebrate Christmas alone, and then had the incredible nerve to ask me to fund a $15,000 deficit for a massive party they were throwing in the very home I had purchased. They were not just taking advantage of my generosity. They were actively mocking my intelligence. I watched the screen as Bradley's brand new Porsche Panamera pulled into the driveway, carefully navigating around the catering trucks. He stepped out of the vehicle, looking completely relaxed, smiling broadly as he walked over to kiss his wife on the cheek. This family facade had officially come to an end today. I would ensure they paid dearly for their actions. The reckoning was now fully in rapid motion. Exactly. I reached for my phone and dialed a number etched permanently into my memory. Vince Carter operated entirely in the shadows. He was a former Dallas police detective who opened a private intelligence firm. I utilized his skills a decade ago when a rival manufacturing company attempted to steal my proprietary refrigeration designs. Vince was ruthless, meticulously thorough, and devoid of moral hesitation when uncovering the truth. He was the ghost I needed to infiltrate the circus occupying my property. Vince answered with a low, gravelly rasp. I gave him the address of the Highland Park mansion. I told him my son and daughter-in-law were hosting a massive event on my property. I instructed him to blend in with the event staff and find out exactly what they were celebrating. I needed vendor names, event itineraries, and a clear understanding of the guest list. Vince did not ask any questions. He simply quoted his emergency holiday retainer fee, which I approved instantly, and promised a preliminary report within the hour. With the physical investigation delegated to a professional, I turned my attention back to the digital trap I had laid. I opened a separate browser window on my laptop, and logged directly into the secure portal for the secondary corporate credit card I had handed to Bradley. I refreshed the transaction screen. It was entirely blank. The $15,000 catering charge had not been processed. I sat back and watched the blinking cursor, feeling the quiet rhythm of the apartment around me. Bradley was currently holding a card with a $25,000 limit. If the caterer was truly threatening to walk away, that charge should have posted the very minute he left my building. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The sun outside my window began its slow descent, casting long, cold shadows across the downtown skyline. Just as I reached for my cooling cup of coffee, a sharp notification tone chimed from my laptop speakers. A pending transaction had just populated on the ledger. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing at the details displayed on the crisp, bright white screen. It was not a charge from a private organic chef. It was not a payment to a high-end floral arranger or an event logistics company. The transaction was for exactly $12,500. The merchant name listed was Apex Exotic Motor Club, a premium luxury car rental agency located on the affluent north side of the city. My breathing slowed as I processed the magnitude of the fabrication. Bradley had stood in my living room, looked me directly in the eyes, and fabricated a story about his wife having a severe mental breakdown over a holiday meal. He had weaponized my paternal concern to secure funding, not to feed his family, but to rent a supercar. I opened a new tab and quickly searched the inventory of the rental agency. $12,500 was the exact daily rate, including the exorbitant security deposit for a current-year Ferrari F8 Tributo. He was renting a Ferrari to park in the expansive circular driveway of the mansion I owned. The puzzle pieces began to slam together with sickening clarity. The massive event tents, the red carpet, the 12-piece live band, the ice sculptures, and now an expensive exotic Italian sports car functioning as a magnificent lawn ornament. This was not merely a party. They were actively constructing a highly sophisticated, incredibly expensive stage set. They were manufacturing a profound illusion of fake generational wealth. But why you do not rent a Ferrari and hire a professional event staff just to impress a few wealthy local socialites? You build a stage set like this when you are selling something massive. You create this specific kind of dazzling optical illusion when you need people to believe you possess unlimited resources. They were putting on a show for a very specific, highly targeted audience. My phone vibrated against the desk, snapping me out of my intense calculation. It was a secure text message from Vince Carter. He had already arrived at the Highland Park estate. The message contained 3 high-resolution photographs taken from a concealed vantage point near the service entrance. I clicked on the first image. It showed a fleet of pristine, expensive black luxury sport utility vehicles lining the street, drivers standing sharply in dark suits, waiting for their elite passengers to arrive. The second photograph zoomed in on a stack of premium gold embossed invitation envelopes resting on a temporary valet podium. The elegant calligraphy was visible, but the exact wording was slightly blurred. Vince had added a brief caption beneath the image. He wrote that the security perimeter was incredibly tight. They had hired off-duty police officers to manage the guest list at the main front gates. Nobody was getting inside without presenting a verified physical invitation. The third image sent a genuine shockwave through my system. It was a candid shot of Tiffany standing near the extravagant ice sculptures. She was no longer wearing the heavy designer fur coat. She was dressed in a stunning floor-length evening gown that sparkled with intricate beadwork. But that was not what caught my attention. Standing directly beside her, holding a crystal glass of champagne, was a prominent Dallas city councilman. Behind him, engaged in deep conversation with Bradley, was the chief executive of a major regional commercial bank. These were not casual acquaintances or neighborhood friends. These were heavy hitters. These individuals controlled massive amounts of municipal power and immense streams of institutional capital. My son, an average tech manager, and my daughter-in-law, an unemployed social climber, were hosting the most powerful financial players in the city. A deep, visceral sense of dread began to pool in my stomach. The credit card deception suddenly felt like a minor footnote compared to the staggering scale of this operation. If they were entertaining banking executives and city officials under the guise of immense personal wealth, they were playing a highly dangerous, potentially criminal game. They were using the undeniable prestige of my Highland Park property to legitimize whatever fraudulent pitch they were delivering to that elite crowd. I immediately typed a response to Vince. I instructed him to find a way past the security checkpoint, no matter the cost or method. I needed to know exactly what was written on those gold-embossed invitations. I needed to know the specific name of the event they were hosting. I told him to authorize whatever bribes were necessary to get a copy of the evening program into my hands. I closed the laptop screen, plunging the room into quiet dimness. The emotional paralysis from the toy store yesterday felt like a fading memory. It was replaced by calculating fury. My son was not just a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. He was actively running a sophisticated con on my property, using my money to fund the illusion. I leaned back, staring into the shadows. The arrogance of his strategy was almost impressive, but he made the fatal mistake of leaving the architect of his fake empire completely alive and fully aware. The silence in my office was broken by the sharp, demanding ring of my cellular phone. It was exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes since I had tasked Mitchell Harper with tearing into my financial records. I picked up the device, my eyes still fixed on the glowing surveillance feed of my mansion, where the red carpet was now fully rolled out and the jazz band was warming up. I swiped the screen to accept the call and pressed the phone against my ear. Mitchell did not offer a standard greeting. I could hear the rhythmic clicking of his keyboard in the background, a sound that always indicated he was deeply submerged in a complex legal labyrinth. "Rick," began his voice unusually tight. "I have the preliminary results you requested regarding the Highland Park estate." I listened closely, preparing myself for a massive second mortgage or a hidden lien. However, what Mitchell said next was entirely unexpected. "The property is completely clean," he stated. "The deed is fully intact. There are absolutely no secondary loans taken out against the equity, and the property taxes are paid in full through the end of the year. Your son and daughter-in-law have not touched the structural financing of the house." I frowned, processing this information carefully. It did not align with the sheer scale of the deception I was currently watching unfold on my tablet. A clean house deed was a relief, but it did not explain the rented Ferrari or the presence of powerful municipal figures sipping vintage champagne on my patio. I told Mitchell about the live security footage. I described the catering trucks, the massive ice sculptures, and the specific individuals I had identified mingling in the garden. I explained that Bradley had just walked away with a corporate credit card after feeding me a pathetic story about a modest dinner. "If they are not bleeding the house dry," I asked, my voice low and steady, "then how are they funding this extravagant charade, and what exactly are they trying to sell to a regional banking executive?" The line went perfectly quiet for a long, agonizing moment. When Mitchell finally spoke, the professional detachment in his tone had vanished, replaced by a grave, heavy seriousness. "Rick," he said slowly, "because your son is technically listed as an authorized representative on a few of our older dormant vendor accounts, I decided to run a comprehensive sweep of the primary corporate architecture. I ran a diagnostic on Stanford Industrial Refrigeration. My blood froze in my veins. Stanford Industrial Refrigeration was not just a company. It was my entire life. It was 40 years of relentless travel, sleepless nights, and incredibly brutal negotiations. It was the absolute foundation of my wealth, an empire I had built with my bare hands, from a single rusted service truck into a logistics powerhouse. "Why would you look at the corporate accounts?" My voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Because," Mitchell replied, his tone grim and deliberate. "I found a highly classified massive credit inquiry filed 48 hours ago. Someone has initiated a commercial loan application for $12 million. The collateral listed for this massive line of credit is not the Highland Park property, Rick. It is the operational equipment, the existing warehouse leases, and the proprietary manufacturing patents of Stanford Industrial Refrigeration. They are attempting to leverage your life work to secure an enormous mountain of institutional cash. The sheer gravity of the situation crashed over me like a physical blow. The air in my small apartment suddenly felt incredibly thin. Bradley was not just an entitled child throwing a lavish party to impress his shallow friends. He was attempting to execute a hostile, fraudulent takeover of my corporate assets. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with devastating precision. The regional banking executive standing on my patio was not a guest. He was the mark. Bradley had rented the exotic sports car, hired the massive catering crew, and transformed my home into a Hollywood movie set to convince this banker that the Stanford family was expanding, that Bradley himself was the newly appointed heir to a wildly successful empire, and that a $12 million investment was a completely safe, highly lucrative opportunity. He was using the illusion of extreme flashy wealth to blind the bank into fast-tracking a massive commercial loan. Mitchell continued speaking, his voice cutting through the ringing in my ears. The loan application is currently pending executive approval, he explained. They used Bradley and his minor administrative status to bypass the initial security flags. They forged your digital signature on the primary authorization forms explicitly stating that you are stepping down due to declining health and passing full operational control to Bradley. They literally fabricated a medical narrative to explain your sudden absence from the corporate hierarchy. They claimed you were quietly retiring to a medical facility, which perfectly explains why they needed to ban you from the holiday party. You could not be seen walking around perfectly healthy while they were pitching your tragic decline to a room full of powerful investors. This party is a coordinated high-stakes presentation. They needed the banker to see the house, see the cars, and believe the lie before the final paperwork is pushed through next week. I stood up from my desk, my hands clenched into tight fists. The anger I felt was no longer a burning, chaotic fire. It had compressed into something cold, hard, and terrifyingly sharp. My own flesh and blood had systematically plotted to steal everything I had built. They had looked me in the eyes, accepted my money, lived in my house, and simultaneously orchestrated a scheme that would leave me financially ruined and legally entangled in a massive banking fraud. If that loan defaulted, the bank would immediately seize my patents, my warehouses, and my entire fleet of vehicles. The empire I had constructed to provide for my family would be dismantled and sold for scraps to cover a reckless ambition. The sheer depth of the betrayal was staggering. It was a calculated sociopathic level of greed that I simply could not comprehend. I had raised a monster, and I had handed him the very tools he was using to dig my grave. I walked toward this window, looking out over the fading city skyline. The cold twilight was settling heavily over Dallas, perfectly mirroring the complete darkness expanding rapidly inside my hollow chest. "Mitchell," I said, my voice eerily calm and entirely devoid of any remaining paternal hesitation. "I want you to draft an emergency corporate injunction immediately. Freeze every single business asset, revoke all peripheral administrative permissions across the entire board, and flag the $12 million application as an active hostile financial fraud. Do not contact the local bank directly just yet. I want the steel trap to remain perfectly open until I am standing right in the absolute center of it. Bradley wants to play the wealthy, powerful corporate executive for his highly distinguished luxury guests tonight. My son is about to learn exactly what real unforgiving power looks like. We will crush him." Vince Carter was a man of exceptional resourcefulness and profound, unyielding dedication. Less than 20 minutes after my initial command, my cellular phone vibrated across the dark wood of my desk. A new encrypted email had arrived. I opened the message immediately. There was no text in the email, only a series of high-resolution attachments. I clicked the first image file, expanding it across my wide screen. Vince had intercepted a delivery driver at the service gate. The photograph displayed the inside of a cardboard shipping box packed with thick, glossy pamphlets bound by gold ribbons. The second image was a crisp macro shot of the pamphlet cover. The heavy cardstock was embossed with a sleek crest and an imposing title, It read, "The Stanford Horizon Real Estate Investment Fund." Below the crest, it declared inaugural founders gala, hosted by managing partners Bradley and Tiffany Stanford. The reality of their scheme crystallized before my eyes. The third image showed the interior pages of the brochure. It was a masterpiece of corporate fiction. There were professional photographs of Bradley standing before high-rise developments he did not own. The text outlined a highly exclusive investment opportunity. They were pitching a visionary real estate portfolio to the wealthiest individuals in Dallas, promising astronomical returns. They were using the prestige of my name, the grandeur of my mansion, and a rented Ferrari to project an illusion of unstoppable success. They were baiting powerful people into funding a ghost fund, but launching a fraudulent firm of this magnitude required massive amounts of seed capital. You cannot rent supercars and hire elite event staff with empty pockets. I knew Bradley's finances intimately. He simply did not have the liquid cash. The secondary credit card I had given him was a drop in the ocean compared to what they were burning. As my mind raced through the terrifying financial implications, the ring of my phone shattered the quiet focus of my office. It was Mitchell Harper. I answered the call immediately, demanding answers. "They are not just throwing a party," I said sharply. "They are launching a fake real estate investment fund. They are using my property to solicit millions from private investors. But they had to get the seed money to build the stage from somewhere. Have you found the source of the capital?" Rick Mitchell replied, his voice shaken. "I found it. And it is a catastrophic nightmare." When I dug past the initial $12 million inquiry, I found a secondary file buried deep within the corporate registry. It is not pending. It is already fully executed and actively draining your primary accounts. I gripped the edge of my desk. What exactly did they do, Mitchell? Tell me everything. They did not just apply for credit, Rick. Bradley used his limited access to bypass security gates, but to move capital, he needed executive authorization. He provided it. I am looking at a scanned power of attorney document. It explicitly grants Bradley unrestricted legal authority to leverage the assets of Stanford Industrial Refrigeration. It bears your forged signature and a notary stamp. It was used to secure a business loan for $3 million. That money was deposited into a holding account. They are using $3 million of your corporate money to play venture capitalists. The words slammed into my chest. A forged power of attorney. My son had circumvented the law, fabricated documents, and stolen $3 million from the lifeblood of my 40-year-old company. He had mortgaged the sweat and sacrifice of my entire existence to finance a fraudulent vanity project for himself and his shallow wife. If this real estate fund collapses, Mitchell continued, the panic evident in his tone, and they default on that massive loan, the bank will immediately seize the collateral. They will take the warehouses. They will liquidate the manufacturing equipment. They will take your patents. Rick, they have placed you directly on a financial cliff. If they go down, they are taking your entire corporate empire. You will be bankrupt. Your legacy will be entirely erased. I closed my eyes, letting the severity of the situation wash over me. For a brief moment, the image of my late wife, Beverly, flashed across my mind. I remembered the early days of our marriage, sitting at the kitchen table counting pennies and sacrificing every single luxury so I could buy my very first refrigeration truck. We had built this empire together, brick by painstaking brick, to ensure our family would never know the bitter taste of poverty. And now the boy she had brought into this world was actively using our life work as kindling to burn his own twisted path to social glory. He was not just stealing my money, he was desecrating her memory. I opened my eyes, and the lingering traces of paternal sorrow were completely gone. I was no longer a father dealing with a wayward son. I was a chief executive officer responding to an existential threat. The situation had escalated from a painful family betrayal into a profound criminal conspiracy that threatened to obliterate my entire life. "Mitchell," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "Listen to me very carefully. Do not freeze the accounts. Do not file the injunction. Do not alert the bank, the authorities, or anyone else about the forged power of attorney. Do absolutely nothing to disturb the waters. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Rick, that is corporate suicide. Mitchell argued, his professional instincts kicking in. You cannot let them continue to operate with a forged legal document. If we do not shut this down immediately, your personal liability will be astronomical. I will not shut it down from a safe distance, I replied, staring blankly at the dark wall of my office. I want them to feel the absolute maximum impact of their arrogance. They have meticulously built an elaborate, incredibly expensive stage set. They have invited the most powerful people in the city to witness their ascension. I am going to let them put on their show. I am going to let them stand under the bright lights, raise their glasses of vintage champagne, and deliver their fraudulent pitch to the very people they are trying to impress. I paused, letting the heavy, cold reality of my plans settle into the atmosphere. And then, when they are at the absolute peak of their imaginary triumph, when they think they have finally conquered the world using my stolen wealth, I am going to walk through the front doors of my own house. I am going to step onto their perfectly manicured stage, and I am going to burn their fake empire to the ground in front of every single person they are trying to deceive. I want the legal documents drafted and ready for my signature by tomorrow morning, Mitchell. Prepare every single transfer of ownership, every single eviction notice, and every single criminal complaint. Prepare the final execution order for the complete liquidation of their lives. I am personally going to attend the inaugural Founders Gala tomorrow evening. I ended the call with Mitchell and let the heavy silence of the apartment wash over me. The entire night stretched out before me, but sleep was an absolute impossibility. I sat in the darkness of my office watching the city of Dallas slowly wake up as the pale light of dawn began to creep across the horizon. I had spent the last 40 years building a fortress of financial security for my family, believing I was shielding them from the harsh realities of the world. Instead, I had inadvertently funded the construction of a beautiful, terrifying guillotine, and my own son was cheerfully pulling the lever. At precisely 7:00 in the morning, my phone vibrated against the polished wood of my desk. It was another secure, encrypted message from Vince Carter. He had not slept either. The message contained a single large digital file attachment. The brief text below it simply read, I intercepted a courier delivering the final presentation materials to the service entrance. This is the official investor packet they will be distributing to the guests tonight. You need to read this immediately. I downloaded the file and opened it on my large desktop monitor. The screen instantly filled with a meticulously designed, highly professional corporate prospectus. The cover page was bound in deep navy blue embossed with elegant gold lettering that mirrored the invitations Vince had photographed the day prior. The title declared the venture as the Stanford Legacy Fund. Below it, the text proudly announced, Building the Future on a Foundation of Unmatched Excellence. I scrolled past the title page, my eyes scanning the polished executive summaries and the aggressive, highly inflated financial projections. The document was a masterclass in corporate deception. It outlined a series of massive, high-density residential real estate developments across the fastest-growing sectors of Texas. It promised investors unprecedented returns, using the established 40-year track record of Stanford Industrial Refrigeration as the absolute guarantee of their operational competence. They were leveraging my unblemished reputation to sell a hollow dream. But the financial fabrications were nothing compared to what I found on page 4. I stopped scrolling. My hand froze over the computer mouse. I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over again, completely unable to process the profound level of sickness radiating from the digital text. The page was titled, A Letter from the Managing Partner. It featured a professionally lit, somber photograph of Bradley standing in front of my primary manufacturing facility. Below the image was a personal message directed to the potential investors. I read the first paragraph, and the air was forcefully punched from my lungs. For 4 decades, my father, Richard Stanford, built an empire defined by uncompromising integrity, and visionary leadership. The text began, "It is with a heavy heart that I must share the difficult reality our family has been navigating privately over the past year. My father has tragically succumbed to early onset, rapidly progressing Alzheimer's disease. As his cognitive decline accelerated, it became necessary to transition him into a specialized full-time memory care facility where he can receive the constant medical attention he now requires. I felt a cold, paralyzing numbness spread from my chest down to my fingertips. I stared at the words tracing the letters with my eyes. End-stage Alzheimer's disease. A memory care facility. Cognitive decline. The text continued dripping with manufactured, nauseating bravery. In the wake of this devastating personal tragedy, it has fallen upon my shoulders to take up the mantle. Before his memory completely faded, my father explicitly legally entrusted me with the reins of the Stanford legacy. He charged me with protecting our family assets and expanding our vision into the future. The Stanford Legacy Fund is the culmination of his final wishes. It is my solemn duty to honor his life work by building an investment portfolio that reflects his unparalleled standard of excellence. My stomach violently recoiled. The sheer sociopathic magnitude of the lie was beyond human comprehension. They had not merely asked me to leave my own house for a holiday party. They had not just stolen $3 million using a forged document. They had officially, publicly, and legally declared me mentally dead. The puzzle pieces locked together with a terrifying absolute finality. This was exactly why Mitchell had discovered that fraudulent power of attorney document. Bradley had not just forged my signature, he had undoubtedly fabricated a comprehensive suite of medical records to accompany it. He had presented those fake medical evaluations to the bank to justify why the powerful founder of Stanford Industrial Refrigeration was suddenly surrendering total control of his corporate assets. He had created a tragic, sympathetic narrative to manipulate the regional banking executives into fast-tracking a $12 million commercial loan. And it explained the most painful detail of all. It explained why they needed me out of the Highland Park mansion. They could not possibly host a lavish high-stakes investor gala to launch their fraudulent fund while the supposedly brain-damaged, incapacitated patriarch of the family was walking around the living room in perfect health, offering his guests a glass of wine. I was an active threat to their narrative. My physical presence would instantly shatter the multi-million-dollar illusion they had constructed. So they orchestrated a petty, emotional fight. They used my deep paternal love to make me feel unwanted, driving me away so they could safely host my funeral and inherit my empire while I was still drawing breath. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the profound darkness of my office. The betrayal was so deep, so fundamentally evil, that it bypassed standard anger entirely. It settled into a place of absolute crystalline clarity. They had stripped me of my humanity, reducing my entire existence to a tragic sob story designed to solicit venture capital from wealthy Dallas elites. Tiffany had likely cried real pathetic tears while explaining my fictional diagnosis to the city councilmen standing by the ice sculptures. They were parading my living corpse around to line their pockets. I looked at the digital clock in the corner of my screen. It was 8:15 in the morning. The inaugural Founders Gala was scheduled to begin at 7 o'clock this evening. I had roughly 11 hours to finalize the total destruction of their lives. I closed the fraudulent prospectus and opened a new secure communication channel to Mitchell Harper. My fingers flew across the keyboard with mechanical, unforgiving precision. I instructed Mitchell to contact his most aggressive, seasoned litigation partners. I wanted the forged medical records subpoenaed immediately. I ordered him to draft a comprehensive dossier of their criminal fraud, including the intercepted pitch deck, the illegal vehicle rentals, and the unauthorized corporate credit withdrawals. I told him to prepare for a scorched earth legal assault. We were not going to negotiate. We were going to obliterate them. Then I stood up and walked into my bedroom. I opened my closet and pulled out my finest custom-tailored Italian suit. It was a dark, formidable charcoal gray, the exact suit I wore when executing hostile corporate takeovers. I laid it carefully across the bed, matching it with a crisp white shirt and a solid black silk tie. I moved into the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were sharp, bright, and utterly devoid of the sad, accommodating father who had handed over a credit card just 24 hours prior. Bradley and Tiffany had spent the last 3 years humiliating me behind closed doors, treating me like a disposable asset. They had spent the last week actively orchestrating a narrative of my mental decline to steal everything I had built over 40 years. They were currently standing in my home preparing to tell a room full of powerful investors that Richard Stanford was a tragic memory locked away in a medical facility. I splashed cold water on my face and dried it with a towel. They wanted a narrative. They wanted a show. I was going to give them a performance they would never forget. The Founders' Gala was going to feature an uninvited keynote speaker. The dead man was coming back to life, and he was bringing absolute hell with him. I smoothed my dark charcoal suit. For decades I wore this suit when crushing arrogant competitors and dissecting fraudulent mergers. I never anticipated wearing it to execute the destruction of my own flesh and blood. But Bradley had crossed a line. He attempted to erase my existence. I grabbed my keys and walked out without a backward glance. The drive toward Highland Park was quiet. I steered toward a dimly lit municipal parking lot 2 miles from the estate, the designated rendezvous point. I spotted 3 vehicles parked in discreet formation. One was Mitchell Harper's silver sedan. The second was Vince Carter's black utility vehicle. The third was an unmarked police cruiser. I parked and stepped into the crisp winter air. Mitchell and Vince were standing between their vehicles, flanked by 2 solidly built men wearing dark tactical jackets. As I approached, Mitchell stepped forward. "Rick," he said, his voice professional. "These are Detectives Miller and Hayes from the Financial Crimes Unit. We briefed them on the situation, and they reviewed the preliminary digital files I sent earlier." I shook hands with both detectives. They looked at me like a vital asset in a criminal takedown. "Mr. Stanford." Detective Miller began, his tone serious. "Your attorney laid out a highly disturbing sequence of events. We investigate corporate embezzlement daily, but the brazen audacity of what your son is attempting tonight is frankly unprecedented. If the documents your team provided are accurate, we are looking at multiple felony counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. We need to verify the physical evidence before we move on the property. We cannot disrupt a gathering involving city officials without ironclad justification." "I understand completely," I replied. I walked to my trunk and popped it open. A portable light illuminated the interior, casting a harsh glow over a thick leather briefcase. I clicked the latches open and pulled out a stack of organized documents, placing them on the hood of Mitchell's sedan. "We are not going to rely on digital copies or verbal accusations, gentlemen," I stated clearly. "We will build an impenetrable wall of hard facts right here." I handed the first document to Detective Hayes. "This is the original notarized deed to the Highland Park property," I explained. "I am the sole legal owner of the estate. Bradley and Tiffany Stanford are listed as temporary occupants. They have no legal authority to host a commercial investment gala on those premises. I have every legal right to walk through those doors tonight." Hayes inspected the raised seal on the deed and passed the document to his partner. I pulled out a bound medical file and placed it on the hood. "This," I continued, "is a certified medical evaluation conducted by my primary care physician less than 3 weeks ago. The results unequivocally prove that I am in perfect physical and mental health. There is no trace of cognitive decline, no memory loss, and certainly no end-stage Alzheimer's disease. The narrative my son is pitching to those wealthy investors is a malicious fabrication designed exclusively to steal my identity and legitimize his fraudulent corporate takeover." Mitchell stepped forward, holding the most devastating piece of evidence. "And here is the smoking gun, officers," Mitchell said, sliding a sheet of paper across the hood. "This is the fraudulent power of attorney document. Bradley used this forgery to circumvent the executive security protocols at Stanford Industrial Refrigeration. He fabricated his father's signature to authorize a $3 million commercial loan withdrawal. He funneled those stolen funds into a holding account to bankroll the fake real estate investment firm he is launching tonight. He is soliciting millions of dollars from powerful regional bankers based entirely on stolen money and forged medical records. Detective Miller shined a flashlight over the forged signature. He compared it carefully to the authentic signature on my medical documents and the property deed. After a minute of intense scrutiny, Detective Miller clicked off his flashlight and looked directly into my eyes. "The evidence is absolutely definitive, Mr. Stanford," the detective said, his voice laced with professional grimness. "This is a highly coordinated multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy. We have enough probable cause to secure an immediate arrest warrant for Bradley Stanford and anyone actively assisting him in this financial fraud." "Excellent," I replied. "So what is our tactical approach? How do we execute this breach?" Detective Hayes leaned against the car. "We have 2 patrol units holding position 3 blocks away," he explained. "They are ready to roll on my command. However, given the presence of high-profile municipal figures at this event, we need a quiet surgical insertion. If we go rushing in with sirens blaring, it will create mass panic and give your son a chance to destroy physical evidence. We need to get inside, secure the perimeter, and corner the suspects before they realize the trap has closed." "I have a better idea," I said smoothly. "Bradley and Tiffany spent thousands of dollars hiring elite security to keep me out. They are terrified of my physical presence ruining their illusion. If police show up at the front gate, they will stall you. But if I walk through those doors, the shock will paralyze them." I looked at Mitchell, then at the detectives. "I will go in first," I instructed. "I will bypass their security checkpoint. I will walk directly into the main ballroom and confront my son in front of every investor he is trying to swindle. I will force him to explain my miraculous recovery from end-stage memory loss. I will let him publicly choke on his own lies, and the moment he realizes his entire fraudulent empire is collapsing, that is when you will walk into the room and place him in handcuffs. I want him completely ruined." Mitchell let out a slow breath. "Rick, that is incredibly dangerous. If you corner him publicly, he might react violently. He will not have the chance," I countered, "because Vince is going to walk in right behind me." Vince stepped out of the shadows, a dangerous smile playing on his lips. "I already have the layout memorized." "Mr. Stanford," the investigator rasped, "I can slip past the catering entrance and secure the main hallway before the security detail even knows we are inside. Nobody is going to touch you." Detective Miller exchanged a significant look with his partner. "We cannot officially endorse a civilian initiating a confrontation," he stated formally. "However, since you are the legal owner of the property, we cannot stop you from entering your own home. We will give you exactly 5 minutes inside. After 5 minutes, we are breaching the doors and securing the premises. If things escalate before then, we will move in immediately. Do we have a clear understanding, Mr. Stanford?" "We have a perfect understanding, Detective," I replied. I closed the thick leather briefcase, the sharp snap of the brass latches echoing loudly. The execution squad was assembled. The trap was perfectly set. I was about to dismantle the life of the boy I had raised. There was only necessary brutal justice. I opened my door and looked back at the team. "Let us crash a party." I settled into the heavy leather passenger seat of Mitchell's luxury sedan. The thick door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, instantly cutting off the sharp winter wind and the chaotic ambient noise of the surrounding city. Detective Miller and Detective Hayes pulled out of the municipal parking lot, first in their unmarked cruiser, their headlights sweeping in a wide arc across the dark pavement. Vince Carter followed closely behind them in his completely blacked-out utility vehicle, moving like a phantom in the descending night. Mitchell shifted the car into drive and smoothly joined the quiet procession. We drove through the sprawling streets of Dallas in absolute suffocating silence. The tension inside the heated cabin was incredibly thick, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. I watched the vibrant city lights smear across the tinted glass of my passenger window, bleeding into long ribbons of brilliant gold and crimson. Every single mile we covered brought me closer to the total, irreversible destruction of the fragile family dynamic I had spent 4 decades trying to meticulously build and protect. I rested my hands flat on the fabric covering my knees. They were perfectly, undeniably steady. The chaotic storm of raw anger and profound betrayal had entirely passed, leaving behind a cold, desolate, completely unforgiving landscape of absolute clarity. I was no longer a grieving, desperate father clinging to the illusion of a loving son. I was an instrument of pure consequence. As our small convoy merged onto the elevated highway leading toward the affluent borders of the Highland Park neighborhood, my thoughts drifted away from the immediate tactical situation. They drifted backward through the relentless march of time, settling softly on the beautiful memory of my late wife. Beverly had always been the gentle, incredibly grounding force of my entire existence. She was a woman of profound, quiet grace and absolutely unwavering moral principles. I closed my eyes and vividly pictured her face in the dark, remembering the soft sound of her laughter and the fierce, intensely protective light that burned in her eyes whenever she looked at our only son. She had loved Bradley with a fierce intensity that bordered on the divine. But she had also possessed a sharp, practical wisdom that I had foolishly, stubbornly ignored in the lonely years following her unexpected passing. When Bradley was just a young boy struggling with the basic natural consequences of his own youthful mistakes, Beverly had always fiercely advocated for strict accountability. She fundamentally believed that facing personal hardship was the only true forge for building genuine character. I distinctly remembered a specific afternoon many decades ago when a teenage Bradley had deliberately broken a neighbor's valuable stained glass window and shamelessly lied about his involvement. Beverly had marched him directly over to their front porch by the ear and forced him to look them in the eyes, apologize sincerely, and pay for the expensive replacement glass directly from his own meager savings. She had looked at me later that evening, her expression incredibly serious in the dim light of our kitchen, and told me that if we constantly shielded him from the necessary pain of his own choices, we would inevitably raise a weak, entitled man who believed the world owed him an endless supply of forgiveness. She had warned me with terrifying, prophetic accuracy about the exact soulless monster I was currently driving across the city to completely destroy. I stared out into the vast, dark night, speaking silently and directly to her lingering memory. "I am so incredibly sorry. Beverly," I whispered in the quiet confines of my own mind. "I am so sorry that I let my overwhelming grief blind me to his true calculating nature. When you tragically left us, the heavy silence in that massive empty house was completely unbearable for me to manage alone. I desperately tried to fill the enormous void you left behind by giving him absolutely everything he ever asked for without hesitation. I tragically confused financial generosity with genuine paternal love. I confused providing endless material support with fulfilling my actual duty as a strong father. I truly thought I was honoring your beautiful memory by making sure our son never had to struggle for anything, never had to worry about paying a single bill, and never had to face the cold, unforgiving reality of the harsh corporate world we had conquered together. But in my desperate, misguided attempt to give him a completely perfect life, I systematically and completely dismantled his internal moral compass. Every single time I quietly paid off his mounting debts, every time I happily funded a new luxury vacation, every time I weakly accepted a hollow apology instead of demanding genuine accountability, I was actively laying another solid brick in the vast foundation of his profound, limitless arrogance. I softly cushioned his falls for his entire adult life. I intentionally built an artificial reality where his reckless actions had absolutely no negative consequences whatsoever. I single-handedly created the entitled, ruthless, incredibly dangerous predator who is currently standing in our former family home, actively trying to steal the massive corporate empire we built with our own blood, sweat, and endless tears. The heavy rubber tires hummed a steady, hypnotic rhythm against the smooth asphalt of the highway. Tonight, the endless comfortable cushioning finally definitively stops. Tonight, he hits the hard, unforgiving concrete. I will not allow him to drag your beautiful legacy through the mud of his own greed. I will not allow him to use the highly respected company we built from nothing to maliciously defraud innocent investors. I will aggressively strip him of the fake armor I so foolishly provided, and I will force him to stand completely naked and entirely alone before the terrible, crushing weight of the law. I am going to legally and socially break him, Beverly, not out of a sense of vindictive malice, but because it is the absolute last act of genuine parenting I have left to offer him. It is the only remaining way to permanently balance the scales of justice. The quiet convoy slowed considerably as we finally approached the main, tree-lined thoroughfare of the Highland Park district. Mitchell tapped the leather steering wheel nervously, his eyes fixed intensely on the dark road ahead. We are approximately 2 minutes out from the target location. "Rick," he said quietly, his voice slicing through the heavy, oppressive silence of the car. "The police units are going to strategically stage their vehicle at the dark end of the block. Vince will proceed directly to the rear service entrance on foot. Are you absolutely undeniably certain you are fully ready for this confrontation?" I looked at the grand, sprawling, incredibly expensive estates passing slowly by my window, their elaborate, sparkling holiday light displays actively mocking the profound, heavy darkness pooling deep in my chest. "I have never been more ready for anything in my entire existence," I replied evenly. The sleek car turned smoothly onto my familiar street, and the glowing, chaotic, absolutely massive spectacle of the inaugural Founders Gala finally came into direct, undeniable, blinding view, marking the definitive beginning of the inevitable end. It was precisely 8:30 in the evening when Mitchell pulled the sedan into the long, circular driveway of my Highland Park estate. The property was entirely transformed, bathed in the harsh, brilliant glow of professional event lighting that painted the stone facade in shades of icy blue and brilliant white. A fleet of valets in sharp red jackets scrambled to manage a steady stream of arriving luxury vehicles, while the deep resonant bass of a 12-piece live jazz band throbbed through the crisp winter air. It was a masterpiece of manufactured prestige, a flawlessly executed illusion designed to blind the wealthiest investors in Dallas to the absolute void of truth beneath it. I stepped out of the vehicle, the cold night air hitting my face like a necessary shock of clarity. Mitchell fell into step directly on my right, clutching the heavy leather briefcase that contained the absolute destruction of my son. Detectives Miller and Hayes emerged from their cruiser, moving with the quiet, formidable purpose of men who understood exactly how this night was going to end. From the shadows of the manicured hedge line, Vince Carter materialized, offering a single curt nod to indicate the perimeter was fully secured and the service staff was completely oblivious to our arrival. We moved together as a single, unstoppable unit up the wide stone walkway. 2 private security guards, hired by my son using my stolen money, stood firmly at the base of the massive front steps. They wore dark suits and earpieces, their hands resting cautiously near their waistbands. As I approached, the taller guard stepped forward, raising a hand to block my path. He opened his mouth to ask for an invitation, but his words died instantly in his throat as Detective Miller smoothly produced his gold badge, holding it up in the harsh event lighting. The guard swallowed hard, his eyes darting from the badge to my cold, unyielding expression. I did not break stride. I walked directly past him, climbing the steps of the home I had purchased with my own blood and sweat. The massive custom-carved oak double doors stood before me, slightly ajar, to allow the warm air and the lively music to spill out into the night. Through the narrow gap, I could see the grand foyer and the sprawling ballroom beyond. It was packed with the absolute elite of Dallas society. I saw regional banking executives, prominent municipal judges, and wealthy real estate developers, all dressed in immaculate evening gowns and tailored tuxedos. Waiters in crisp white uniforms navigated the crowded room, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of expensive vintage champagne and decadent culinary creations. It was the absolute peak of the gala, the precise moment when the heavy lifting of the initial pitch gives way to the intoxicating rush of collective celebration. Bradley was standing at the absolute center of the room, elevated slightly on a temporary mahogany stage. He was wearing a tuxedo that likely cost more than his first car, holding a crystal glass high in the air. Beside him stood Tiffany, draped in a glittering floor-length designer gown, beaming with the radiant manufactured pride of a newly crowned queen. Bradley was speaking, his voice amplified by a discreet microphone system, projecting a smooth, confident charisma that made my stomach churn with absolute disgust. He was concluding a toast, thanking the assembled power brokers for placing their ultimate trust in the Stanford Legacy Fund, explicitly promising them that the brilliant, unparalleled vision of his tragically incapacitated father would live on through his bold new leadership. The crowd murmured in polite, sympathetic agreement, raising their own glasses to honor the noble son taking up the heavy mantle of a fallen patriarch. I placed my hands flat against the heavy oak wood of the double doors. I took one final deep breath, anchoring myself completely in the cold, hard reality of what I was about to do. Then, with a sudden, forceful shove, I pushed the massive doors violently open. They swung inward with a heavy groaning creak that cut sharply through the ambient noise of the party. I stepped fully into the brilliant light of the grand foyer, flanked immediately by Mitchell Detective Miller and Detective Hayes. I did not say a single word. I simply stood there, an undeniable living ghost in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, radiating absolute authority. The effect was instantaneous and completely catastrophic. The lead trumpet player of the live jazz band caught sight of the police detectives and stumbled on a high note. The drummer faltered, and within 3 agonizing seconds, the entire 12-piece band ground to a chaotic, discordant halt. The sudden, unnatural silence was absolute and completely deafening, broken only by the soft, nervous shifting of expensive fabric as 200 pairs of eyes turned away from the stage and locked onto the entrance. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a wide, clear path directly from the front doors to the mahogany stage. Bradley was frozen in mid-sentence, his mouth hanging slightly open, his microphone still gripped tightly in his left hand. He looked past the crowd, and his eyes locked directly onto mine. I watched the blood completely drain from his face in a matter of seconds, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. He was not looking at a clueless, sick old man. He was looking at the architect of his impending destruction. The crystal champagne flute slipped from his trembling right hand. It fell through the heavy silence of the room and struck the polished marble floor with a sharp, explosive shatter that echoed like a gunshot. The sparkling liquid splashed across the toes of his expensive leather shoes. Tiffany, standing entirely rigid beside him, turned as white as a fresh sheet of paper. Her perfectly manicured hands flew up to cover her mouth, and in the dead quiet of the ballroom, her frantic, panicked whisper carried clearly over the open microphone. "He is supposed to be locked away," she hissed, her voice trembling with absolute terror. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered crowd of wealthy investors as the sheer gravity of her accidental confession washed over the room. The regional banking executive, who had been vigorously nodding along to Bradley just moments before, slowly lowered his glass, his expression hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated outrage. I began to walk down the center of the parted crowd, my footsteps echoing against the marble, my gaze fixed firmly on the stage. I did not look at the city councilman, nor did I acknowledge the stunned socialites whispering frantically to one another. My focus was entirely consumed by the pathetic, trembling figure of my son. He took a small, involuntary step backward, his back hitting the edge of the large presentation screen that proudly displayed the logo of his fraudulent empire. The grand illusion was completely shattered, exposing the hollow, rotting core of his ambition. I reached the base of the stage and stopped, looking up at the boy who had tried to bury me. I had returned to reclaim my life, and the heavy, unforgiving execution of justice had officially begun. I did not even break my steady stride to acknowledge the shattered glass surrounding my son. I kept my eyes completely locked on the mahogany stage as I smoothly ascended the 3 small steps. Bradley instinctively shrank back against the heavy presentation screen, his breathing shallow and rapid. I reached out and calmly took the sleek black microphone directly from his trembling fingers. He offered absolutely no resistance, his hands shaking violently as he surrendered the instrument. I turned my back to him, facing the ocean of stunned faces, and tapped the microphone twice to ensure it was perfectly live. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said, projecting a warm, welcoming tone that echoed clearly across the silent ballroom. "Please forgive the completely unexpected interruption to your magnificent evening. My name is Richard Stanford, the founder and chief executive officer of Stanford Industrial Refrigeration. I am also the sole legal owner of this beautiful Highland Park estate you are currently enjoying. It is a profound pleasure to finally meet all of you tonight, especially since I was completely unaware that my own house was being used to host an inaugural gala for a real estate investment fund I never authorized." A low murmur of genuine confusion rippled instantly through the dense crowd. The powerful regional banking executive standing in the front row frowned deeply, his sharp eyes darting between my perfectly composed face and the terrified expression of my son. Tiffany suddenly launched herself forward, stepping directly into the bright stage lights. Her face was a frantic mask of very sudden damage control. "Please excuse my father-in-law," she cried out loudly to the gathered investors, her voice dripping with thick, artificial sympathy. "His severe dementia unfortunately makes him aggressive and completely confused about his true surroundings here tonight." She reached out gently, as if to safely guide a completely lost patient back to a hospital ward. "We are so incredibly sorry for this disturbing scene," she continued, playing the absolute role of the tragically burdened caregiver. "Bradley has bravely carried the massive weight of his father slowly slipping away, and we just wanted to quietly celebrate the bright new future of the Stanford family tonight, without causing him any undue distress. Please let our private security staff escort him back to his secure medical transport vehicle so we can quickly resume this beautiful, wonderful evening together as planned." I stared at her, feeling a cold surge of absolute disgust wash over my rigid posture. I did not blink, nor did I lower the microphone. My cognitive abilities are functioning flawlessly. "Tiffany," I stated clearly, my voice slicing through her pathetic performance like a sharpened blade. "I am completely lucid, entirely sober, and I possess absolute control over my mental faculties. In fact, I am fully aware that my ambitious son forged a legal power of attorney document to steal $3 million from my primary corporate accounts to unlawfully finance this ridiculous fake gala you are currently hosting." The crowd erupted into an instant chaotic frenzy of breathless whispers and shocked exclamations. The banking executive took a very deliberate step backward, creating immediate physical distance between himself and the stage. Bradley finally found his voice, stepping forward to salvage his rapidly burning empire. "Do not listen to him!" Bradley shouted desperately, his face flushed bright red with sheer panic. "He is having a severe, violent, psychotic episode. The doctors warned us this would eventually happen. He does not even know what year it is or where he is currently standing. He is completely disconnected from objective physical reality." At that exact moment, Mitchell Harper moved purposefully out of the lingering shadows near the grand entrance. My trusted attorney walked smoothly down the center aisle, holding the thick leather briefcase tightly against his side. He approached the absolute front row of gathered VIP investors and efficiently unlatched the brass locks. Without a single word of hesitation, Mitchell began extracting heavy stacks of freshly printed certified legal documents. He handed the very first comprehensive packet directly to the stunned regional banking executive, ensuring the bold black medical seals were instantly visible to anyone standing within 3 feet of his position. "What you are currently holding," Mitchell announced, his voice projecting a sharp, commanding legal authority, "is a fully certified, deeply comprehensive medical evaluation completed precisely 3 weeks ago by Dr. Iris Thorne, a leading neurological specialist. It provides absolute, irrefutable medical proof that Richard Stanford possesses 0 symptoms of any cognitive deterioration. Attached directly behind that medical clearance is the original notarized property deed to this estate confirming Richard Stanford is the sole legal owner. The man standing on this stage has absolutely no legal right to host commercial investment activities on this highly protected, exclusively private residential estate property. The banking executive flipped rapidly through the thick pages, his jaw tightening into a furious, unyielding line as he realized the magnificent depth of the deception. He looked fiercely up at Bradley, his expression completely devoid of any remaining professional courtesy. "You presented fraudulent medical records to my financial institution," the executive stated, his voice completely laced with dangerous, righteous anger. "You explicitly claimed your father was permanently confined to a secure medical unit. You used that fabricated story to justify a $12 million application. You just attempted to commit massive federal bank fraud directly to my own face." The surrounding guests began murmuring loudly in utter outrage, physically backing away from the mahogany stage as if Bradley had suddenly contracted a highly contagious disease. Mitchell pulled another heavy document from his briefcase, holding it up like a definitive execution order. "And this," Mitchell continued, his voice ringing like a final bell, "is the illegally forged power of attorney document." Bradley fabricated the executive signature to steal $3 million directly from the core operating accounts of Stanford Industrial Refrigeration. This entire elite real estate fund is nothing more than a hollow shell completely built on totally stolen capital. Bradley stood perfectly still, his eyes wide and completely hollow. The grand illusion he had spent months desperately crafting had just evaporated into thin air in less than 60 seconds. Tiffany covered her face with her glittering hands, letting out a loud, pathetic sob that was entirely ignored by the furious investors now demanding immediate answers. I lifted the microphone again, feeling absolutely no remaining pity for the crumbling man standing beside me. "I gave you absolutely everything, Bradley," I said smoothly into the microphone, my voice echoing deeply off the high, beautifully painted ceilings of the vast grand ballroom. "I provided you with a wealthy lifestyle, endless corporate opportunities, and complete financial security. But instead of showing genuine gratitude or building an honest path, you decided to legally erase my entire existence. You actively weaponized the pristine memory of your mother and my unyielding love to execute a malicious corporate takeover. You are not a visionary founder, Bradley. You are a common, pathetic thief wearing a stolen tuxedo." I lowered the microphone, allowing the pure reality of my harsh words to settle heavily over the rapidly dissolving remains of his incredibly brief and utterly fraudulent fantasy business kingdom tonight. I did not need the microphone for my next words. The silence in the grand ballroom was so absolute, so suffocatingly thick, that my natural voice carried effortlessly to the farthest corners of the room. I turned my attention away from the trembling shell of my son and addressed the sea of elite Dallas investors directly. "I need you all to understand exactly what you have been invited to purchase tonight," I stated, pacing slowly across the front of the mahogany stage. "The Stanford Legacy Fund does not exist. There is no real estate portfolio. There are no high-density residential developments pending approval. The entire foundation of this exclusive venture is built upon a single catastrophic act of criminal forgery. Just 48 hours ago, the man standing behind me fabricated a legal power of attorney document. He used that fraudulent paperwork to unlawfully extract $3 million from the core operating accounts of my primary manufacturing business." I gestured toward the lavish decorations surrounding us. "Every single thing you see here tonight, from the vintage champagne in your crystal flutes to the elaborate ice sculptures melting on the patio, was paid for with stolen corporate capital. He did not invite you here to offer a visionary investment opportunity. He invited you here to actively participate in a felony. He needed your institutional cash to cover the massive gaping hole he just blew into my company balance sheet. You are not valued partners in a lucrative new venture. You are the unwitting marks in a desperate, deeply illegal pyramid scheme." The reaction from the room was immediate and entirely visceral. The polite, sophisticated veneer of high society. Dallas instantly shattered, replaced by a raw, chaotic panic. These were men and women who protected their wealth with ruthless efficiency, and I had just informed them that they were standing in the very center of a federal crime scene. A prominent commercial real estate developer in the second row, a man who had been chatting amiably with Tiffany just 20 minutes prior, slammed his champagne flute down onto a passing waiter's silver tray with enough force to crack the delicate crystal. I wrote a check for $250,000 during the cocktail hour. The developer roared, his face purple with fury as he lunged toward the stage. I want that draft voided and returned to my hands right this exact second, Stanford, or I am calling my legal team before I even reach the valet stand. His shout acted as the ultimate catalyst. The room erupted into a deafening chorus of angry demands and panicked realizations. Several other investors began shouting over one another, aggressively demanding the immediate return of their signed commitment letters and preliminary deposit checks. Men in expensive tuxedos abandoned their absolute professional decorum, pushing past one another in a frantic rush toward the coat check and the front exit. The grand foyer, which had just been a scene of elegant celebration, rapidly devolved into a chaotic bottleneck of wealthy elites desperately fleeing a sinking ship. I watched as the social elite of the city turned on Bradley and Tiffany with a speed and ferocity that was almost breathtaking to witness. The same socialites who had been fawning over Tiffany's designer gown now looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust, physically pulling their expensive fabrics away as if simply brushing against her would infect them with poverty and criminal liability. The regional banking executive, who had been holding the undeniable proof of the medical forgery, stepped aggressively toward the stage. He did not bother to raise his voice over the escalating din of the crowd. He simply locked eyes with Bradley, pointing a stiff accusatory finger directly at my son's chest. You are completely finished in this city, the executive stated with cold, absolute certainty. I will personally ensure that every financial institution in the state of Texas flags your name. You will never secure a loan for a cup of coffee, let alone a multi-million-dollar commercial venture. Bradley seemed to physically shrink under the overwhelming weight of the executive's promise. He stumbled backward, his shoulders slumping, completely devoid of the slick, arrogant charm he had weaponized all evening. He looked like a frightened, lost child who had just been caught playing a very dangerous game of dress-up. Tiffany, completely abandoning her previous role as the devoted tragic caregiver, grabbed Bradley by the sleeve of his expensive jacket, shaking his arm violently. "Do something!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing over the roar of the fleeing guests. "Tell them it is a mistake, fix this right now." But Bradley could not fix it. He could not charm his way out of hard, undeniable physical evidence. He simply stared blankly at the floor, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic reality of his own actions. I turned my head slightly, catching one final lingering glimpse of my son. He was slumped heavily against the bright digital presentation screen, looking completely broken and utterly defeated, while his wife continued to berate him with shrill, panicked insults. They were drowning in the exact unforgiving reality they had desperately tried to avoid their entire adult lives. The comfortable, wealthy cushion I had provided for decades had been permanently removed, and the hard concrete of absolute accountability was rushing up to meet them with terrifying speed. I stood perfectly still on the edge of the stage, my hands resting comfortably at my sides, watching the complete, unmitigated destruction of the false empire they had tried to build on my grave. The heavy, ornate chandeliers cast long, dramatic shadows across the emptying ballroom, highlighting the abandoned champagne glasses and the discarded promotional pamphlets littering the polished marble floor. The carefully constructed illusion of generational wealth and corporate succession had been thoroughly and publicly gutted. Mitchell Harper stepped up to stand beside me, his presence a calm, steady anchor in the swirling storm of fleeing investors. "The police have officially secured all exterior exits," Rick Mitchell murmured quietly, ensuring only I could hear him over the noise of the crowd. "Detectives Miller and Hayes have requested that we clear the immediate stage area. They are preparing to move in and execute the arrest warrants. The Financial Crimes Unit is already contacting the relevant banking institutions to freeze the stolen $3 million before it can be transferred out of the holding accounts. I nodded slowly, acknowledging my attorney's tactical update. The operation was proceeding with flawless surgical precision. I looked out over the massive, beautiful ballroom of the home I had purchased to provide a safe, luxurious sanctuary for my family. It had been twisted into a theater for a malicious fraud, but the cleansing process had finally begun. The parasitic infection that had taken root in my home and my company was about to be forcibly extracted. I felt absolutely no sorrow, no lingering regret, and zero hesitation inside my hardened heart. I simply felt the cold, necessary, and completely justified satisfaction of a man who has finally stopped running from a deeply painful truth and firmly decided to face it with absolute unwavering and unbreakable strength tonight. The exodus from the grand ballroom was a spectacle of absolute cowardice and rapid self-preservation. The very same regional power brokers and wealthy socialites who had just been drinking my stolen champagne and praising my son were now pushing each other out the doors. Nobody wanted to be in the room when federal authorities began asking questions about a fraudulent $12 million commercial loan. Waiters and event staff quickly abandoned their silver trays on the catering tables and quietly vanished through the service corridors. Within 5 minutes, the sprawling space was entirely empty, save for the scattering of discarded crystal flutes and the melting ice sculptures weeping onto the polished marble floor. The lively energy of the jazz band was replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed down on the room like a physical weight. I remained standing at the base of the mahogany stage, my posture completely rigid, watching the dust settle over the ruins of their magnificent lie. Mitchell Harper stood to my right, clutching his briefcase, his face a mask of detachment. Detectives Miller and Hayes moved slowly to secure the perimeter, positioning themselves directly between the stage and the main exit to block any sudden attempts to flee. Vince Carter lingered in the background, a silent, watchful shadow, ensuring no one else entered the private estate. Bradley was still leaning heavily against the glowing presentation screen, his breathing ragged and shallow. The expensive, custom-tailored tuxedo he wore now looked entirely ridiculous, like a cheap costume on a frightened little boy. He slid down the screen until his knees hit the hard stage floor. He buried his face in his trembling hands, and a loud sob ripped through the agonizing quiet of the ballroom. "Dad." He choked out his voice, a pathetic whine that echoed painfully against the high ceilings. "Dad, please. I am so sorry. You have to believe me. It was never supposed to go this far. It just got completely out of hand. I wanted to build something massive. I wanted to take the Stanford name and elevate it to the next level. I wanted to prove to you that I could be a visionary, that I could manage an institutional portfolio." I stared down at him, feeling absolutely zero pity. "You did not want to build a legacy, Bradley," I stated, my voice echoing with cold, hard precision. "You wanted a shortcut. You wanted the respect and the immense wealth that comes from 40 years of grinding sacrifice, but you completely refused to do the actual work. You chose to erase your own father, forge medical documents, and steal $3 million from the company that put food on your table your entire life. You did not make a simple mistake. You executed a calculated, malicious criminal conspiracy." Tiffany, who had been completely frozen in terror, suddenly snapped to life. The self-preservation instincts of a seasoned social climber aggressively kicked in. She smoothed down the front of her designer gown and took a wide, deliberate step away from her kneeling husband. "Richard," she pleaded, her voice trembling with manufactured innocence as she looked directly at me. "Richard, you have to understand I had no idea about the forged power of attorney. I swear to you. Bradley told me you had willingly set up a trust fund for us to launch this venture. He told me the doctors had genuinely diagnosed you and that you wanted us to take over the public duties. He lied to me too. He manipulated both of us." Bradley jerked his head up, staring at his wife in pure shock. "Tiffany, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice cracking with fresh panic. "You were in the room when we drafted the pitch deck. You literally paid the graphic designer using the stolen corporate card. Shut up, Bradley, she hissed violently, dropping the innocent facade entirely. I am not going to federal prison because you were too stupid to cover your tracks. I am not losing my life because of your massive incompetence. I raised my right hand a single motion that instantly silenced their pathetic bickering. I am not remotely interested in watching the two of you devour each other to save your own skins. I declared, my tone absolutely cold and unyielding. The physical evidence my legal team has compiled meticulously documents both of your signatures, both of your financial authorizations, and your shared undeniable complicity in this entire fraudulent operation. You are both equally toxic, and you are both equally responsible for the absolute devastation you brought into this house. I turned my head, slightly nodding, to the two officers waiting patiently near the center aisle. Detective Miller and Detective Hayes stepped forward, their heavy boots clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. They walked directly up the short steps and flanked my son on the mahogany stage. Bradley Stanford. Detective Miller said, his voice carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of the law. We are placing you under official arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and the criminal forgery of legal financial documents. We have already contacted the regional banking authorities, and the $3 million you unlawfully transferred from Stanford Industrial Refrigeration has been officially frozen. Bradley let out a hollow, agonizing gasp as Detective Hayes firmly grasped his shoulder, forcing him to stand up. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs echoing in the massive ballroom was the most satisfying sound I had heard in 3 years. Tiffany backed away, pressing herself against the far wall of the stage, her chest heaving with sheer uncontrolled panic as she watched her husband being bound like a common criminal. I stepped onto the stage, closing the final physical distance between myself and the woman who had happily plotted my institutional death. The detectives are going to escort Bradley to a secure holding cell downtown, I told her, keeping my voice low, steady, and terrifyingly calm. You are going to be thoroughly investigated, and your own arrest warrant will likely be processed within the next 48 hours. However, right now I have a very specific non-negotiable directive for you regarding this property. Tiffany stared at me, her eyes wide with absolute dread, completely unable to form a single coherent word. I am the sole verified legal owner of this Highland Park estate. I continued enunciating every single syllable with crystal clear precision. You are currently trespassing on my private property. I am giving you exactly 30 minutes to walk upstairs, pack a single suitcase of your personal clothing, and walk out of my front doors permanently. You will not touch the expensive artwork. You will not pack the designer jewelry you purchased with my corporate funds. You will take only the absolute basic necessities, and then you will disappear from my house and my life forever. But where am I supposed to go? She sobbed, completely breaking down as the magnificent, wealthy reality she had stolen finally shattered around her. I do not have any money. The credit cards are entirely frozen. I looked at her without a single ounce of genuine compassion. Your exactly 30 minutes starts right now. Tiffany did not waste another second arguing. She spun around on her high heels, nearly tripping over the hem of her expensive designer gown, and sprinted toward the grand, sweeping staircase. Her panicked, uneven footsteps echoed loudly across the empty marble foyer. I watched her ascend the carpeted steps with frantic, desperate energy, her hands gripping the mahogany banister so tightly her knuckles were completely white. She was no longer the confident, arrogant woman who had strutted through my home as if she owned every single brick. She was a terrified trespasser fleeing a burning building. I turned my attention back to the mahogany stage. Detective Miller and Detective Hayes had efficiently secured Bradley, guiding him firmly by his elbows toward the massive open front doors. My son did not look back at me. He kept his head completely bowed, his chin practically resting on his chest, utterly crushed by the sudden, brutal weight of his own criminal reality. As they led him through the grand entrance and out into the biting winter air, the harsh flashing red and blue lights of the waiting police cruisers spilled across the dark foyer. The brilliant strobe effect painted the tall walls in alternating colors of absolute emergency, a harsh visual reminder of the permanent legal consequences he had recklessly brought upon himself. I watched the seasoned detectives escort him slowly down the wide stone steps, leading him directly toward a specialized group of serious investigators from the Financial Crimes Division, who were waiting very patiently near a dark sedan. They were preparing to question him extensively regarding the massive federal bank fraud and the illegally forged corporate documents he created. Mitchell walked quietly to my right side, his heavy leather briefcase now securely closed and locked. He stood with me in the absolute silence of the grand ballroom, watching the final lingering remnants of the fake gala slowly melt completely away. Vince Carter materialized seamlessly from the dim service hallway, confirming that the hired catering staff had completely vacated the premises and all exterior service doors were now securely locked from the inside. The beautiful house was finally completely ours again. The oppressive, highly manufactured energy of the event had dissipated entirely, leaving behind a cold, hollow, incredibly peaceful shell. It felt exactly like walking alone through a vast museum, long after regular hours, entirely surrounded by expensive historical artifacts that held absolutely no genuine living warmth inside them. The tense minutes slowly ticked by with an agonizing, heavy slowness. I stood perfectly motionless near the base of the grand staircase, calmly waiting for the final necessary element of this long purge to officially conclude. Precisely 28 minutes after I had issued my unwavering legal ultimatum, the heavy, distinct sound of hard-rolling luggage thumped loudly against the wooden upstairs landing. Tiffany finally appeared at the very top of the stairs, struggling immensely to simultaneously maneuver 3 incredibly large, heavy designer suitcases. She had clearly abandoned the elegant, glittering designer gown, hastily changing into a tight pair of dark athletic leggings and a simple beige cashmere sweater. Her carefully styled blonde hair was now completely disheveled, and her elaborate evening makeup was terribly smeared from her constant, uncontrolled, panicking weeping. She practically dragged the heavy luxury bags down the long carpeted stairs, the small plastic wheels bouncing violently and loudly against every single carpeted step. She reached the smooth marble floor of the main foyer, completely exhausted and gasping sharply for breath. She did not bother to look in my exact direction. She simply grabbed the extended metallic handles of her large luggage and began pulling them forcefully toward the wide-open front doors. The intense physical effort was clearly immense, a stark, incredibly pathetic contrast to the highly luxurious, completely effortless life she had arrogantly expected to permanently secure through deep fraud and vast deception. I followed her at a very slow, highly deliberate pace, my steady footsteps completely silent against the smooth stone floor. Mitchell and Vince smoothly fell into precise step directly behind me, creating an unbreakable, completely silent security escort, ensuring her immediate and total departure from my estate. We stepped out into the absolutely freezing night air. The sharp winter wind whipped aggressively across the long, circular driveway, biting deeply through the thin charcoal fabric of my tailored suit jacket. Down near the quiet street, the bright flashing lights of the numerous police vehicles continued to pulse silently against the dark winter trees. Bradley was currently leaning backward against the cold metal hood of an unmarked police cruiser, entirely surrounded by several stern investigators, his unkempt head still hanging very low in total, absolute defeat. Tiffany struggled intensely to drag her massive, extremely heavy suitcases directly across the rough decorative paving stones of the winding driveway. The small, fragile plastic wheels caught constantly on the rough, uneven stone surface, forcing her to aggressively and desperately jerk the large luggage forward with loud, highly frustrated, angry grunts. She finally reached the absolute edge of the sprawling property boundary, just a few short feet away from the towering, incredibly heavy wrought iron security gates that marked the official protected entrance to the private residential estate. She stopped moving right there, dropping the metallic luggage handles completely and abruptly. She slowly turned to fully face me, her chest heaving heavily, her dark eyes burning fiercely with a desperate, incredibly toxic, deeply potent mixture of profound personal humiliation and lingering, completely venomous, utterly delusional entitlement. She looked directly at me, her tear-stained face contorted terribly into a deeply ugly, incredibly bitter, highly vicious sneer. "You are a completely heartless, truly unforgiving monster, Richard," she spat aggressively, her shaking voice vibrating intensely, with raw, completely unfiltered, absolutely pure malice. "You are intentionally, maliciously ruining your very own family. You are happily destroying your own living blood just to ruthlessly prove a very cruel point. You could have easily fixed this financial mess quietly, but you deliberately chose to publicly, brutally humiliate us. You are absolutely ruining your family." I stopped walking precisely 3 feet away from her, my rigid posture completely relaxed, my cold expression entirely devoid of any remaining residual emotion. I looked steadily at the desperate woman who had happily, eagerly plotted to legally lock me safely away in a highly secure medical facility so she could ruthlessly steal my entire life savings. I felt absolutely nothing for her. The deep, heavily agonizing well of profound paternal grief had completely permanently dried up, leaving behind only a solid, unyielding bedrock of unbreakable, absolute legal clarity. "You actively canceled my family at exactly 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon, Tiffany," I responded, my deep voice sounding as cold and exceptionally hard as the freezing winter pavement directly beneath our leather shoes. "When you stood in my private corporate study and happily convinced my son to sign a heavily fraudulent document that legally erased my physical existence, you completely destroyed any familial bond we ever possessed. You eagerly made your permanent choice. I am simply closing the financial account." I turned my back on her completely without waiting for a response. I raised my right hand and gestured sharply. The gates locked. The heavy iron gates slammed shut with a definitive ringing clang that resonated sharply through the crisp winter air. It was the absolute sound of ultimate finality, a physical boundary drawn between my past and my future. I stood alone in the center of the long, circular driveway for a few moments longer, watching the harsh, flashing blue and red lights fade slowly into the dark distance as the police cruisers carried my son away to face his undeniable reality. The sprawling, massively expensive estate behind me was finally completely silent. The chaotic, manufactured noise of the fraudulent gala, the desperate, pathetic pleas of a ruined son, and the venomous, completely delusional insults of a banished daughter-in-law were all completely gone. The deep, relentless financial bleeding that had slowly, systematically drained my spirit and my corporate operating accounts for years had finally been permanently, surgically stopped. I took a deep, cleansing breath of the freezing night air, feeling a profound, incredible weight lift completely off my tired shoulders. The toxic infection had been cut out. I did not stay in the Highland Park mansion. The very next morning, I instructed my legal team to immediately list the massive property for sale. The grand estate had originally been a beautiful monument to the incredible life Beverly and I had built together, but it had recently been twisted into a dark, hollow theater for a malicious fraud. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with the physical space where my own flesh and blood had so eagerly plotted my institutional demise. Instead, I quietly purchased a beautiful, understated luxury apartment in a highly secure, modern high-rise building overlooking the vibrant downtown Dallas skyline. It was a fraction of the size of my former home, but it possessed something infinitely more valuable. It offered absolute, impenetrable peace. There were no haunting memories echoing in the vast hallways, no demanding guests expecting to be lavishly entertained, and absolutely no manipulative family members waiting to ambush me with their endless, manufactured crises. 3 weeks later, the bright, clear light of Christmas morning spilled softly across the polished hardwood floors of my new, quiet sanctuary. The vibrant city below was completely still, resting peacefully in the early hours of the beloved winter holiday. In the past, this specific day had always been a massive, chaotic production. Beverly used to meticulously orchestrate elaborate family gatherings, filling the house with endless warmth, rich food, and beautiful music. After she tragically passed away, I had foolishly attempted to maintain that complex tradition, overcompensating for her absence by showering Bradley and Tiffany with increasingly expensive, utterly ridiculous luxury gifts. I had completely confused genuine paternal affection with mindless, endless consumerism. But this morning was entirely different. I sat completely alone in my comfortable leather armchair by the large floor-to-ceiling window. The apartment was completely silent. I held a simple ceramic mug of hot tongue, black coffee in my steady hands. The rich, dark roast tasted incredibly pure, untainted by the heavy, suffocating anxiety that had ruined my previous holidays. I was alone, but for the first time in an incredibly long decade, I was not remotely lonely. At precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, a soft, respectful knock sounded at my front door. I set my coffee mug down on the glass table and walked over to answer it. Mitchell Harper stood in the carpeted hallway, wearing a tailored charcoal overcoat and holding his familiar heavy leather briefcase tightly against his side. He offered a warm, genuine smile that reached his intelligent eyes, a stark contrast to the severe, unyielding legal persona he had so ruthlessly deployed on the night of the gala. He stepped inside, shaking off the residual winter chill, and we moved together toward the small, elegant mahogany dining table situated near the modern kitchen. He did not offer any empty holiday platitudes or meaningless small talk. He knew exactly why we were meeting on this specific, highly symbolic day. We were here to permanently cement the final, unalterable chapters of my personal and financial legacy. He placed his briefcase on the polished wood and expertly unlatched the brass locks. Mitchell smoothly extracted a thick stack of freshly printed, legally binding documents, sliding the first comprehensive packet directly across the table toward me. "This is the finalized structure for the Ironclad Trust. Richard," he stated, his voice professional, but laced with deep personal respect. "As you explicitly requested, the sole exclusive beneficiary is your newly born grandson. I have personally ensured that the legal language is absolutely impenetrable. The capital is completely locked down, managed by an independent, highly aggressive corporate trustee board based out of state. Bradley and Tiffany are permanently, explicitly barred from accessing a single cent of this money under any circumstances whatsoever. They cannot leverage it, they cannot borrow against it, and they cannot petition the court to release funds for their personal living expenses. The trust will independently pay for the infant's premium health care, his private education, and his basic foundational needs, but the principal balance will not be unlocked until he turns 30 years old. The toxic cycle of unearned wealth ends today." I picked up my favorite fountain pen and signed my name on the designated lines with smooth, unwavering confidence. I felt a deep, profound sense of genuine parental duty returning to my heart. I was finally protecting the innocent child from the massive, destructive arrogance of his own parents. Mitchell then pulled out the second, significantly larger stack of legal paperwork. "And this," my trusted attorney continued sliding the heavy pages toward me, "is the foundational charter for the Beverly Stanford Memorial Foundation. The vast majority of your immense corporate wealth, including the proceeds from the pending sale of the Highland Park estate, will be directly funneled into this specific entity. The operational mandate is exactly as you designed it. The foundation will provide comprehensive financial support, top-tier legal advocacy, and secure housing for vulnerable elderly individuals who have been abandoned, exploited, or maliciously manipulated by their own family members. We are officially fully funded and ready to immediately commence charitable operations." I reviewed the beautiful charter, seeing Beverly's name printed boldly across the crisp white pages. She had always believed in accountability and protecting the truly vulnerable. She warned me about the monster our son would become if I continued shielding him from his own terrible choices. I had failed to listen back then, but I was finally honoring her legacy now. I pressed my pen against the paper and signed the final documents, legally transferring my empire into an instrument of public good. I placed the fountain pen down gently on the smooth mahogany table and leaned back in my chair. A deep, highly satisfying warmth spread completely through my chest. I looked out the large window at the brilliant, clear blue Christmas sky, finally allowing a genuine, unburdened smile to grace my face. I had lost a son to the dark, unforgiving depths of pure greed, but in the absolute quiet stillness of this beautiful morning, I knew with absolute certainty that I had successfully bought back my own soul. Sometimes the deepest betrayal comes from the very people you spent your entire life trying to protect. We pour our sweat, blood, and tears into building a foundation for our children, hoping they will respect the sacrifice. But money without discipline only breeds toxic entitlement. True love is not about writing blank checks or cushioning every fall. It is about holding them accountable. Cutting off a toxic family member, even your own flesh and blood, does not make you a failure as a parent. It makes you a survivor. Protect your peace guard, your legacy, and never let anyone turn you into a victim. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button to support the channel. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to protect your peace? Share your experience in the comments below. Do not forget to subscribe so you never miss our next story.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that and the woman she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.